I work as an emergency room nurse at a large hospital, and I was working the night shift at the time. During my time on that shift, I saw many strange and shocking things. This story, however, is about the scariest thing that I've ever experienced. My shift began at 10 p.m. and went until 6 in the morning. It was a large hospital in the downtown core of the city where I live. There was a whole hospital district in the area. The children's hospital was right next door, and the cancer ward was not far off. It was a warm summer night. The city was dark as I drove my car into the staff parking area. The security guard checked my badge and waved me in. I parked and walked to the entrance, like I had many times before. When I stepped into the building, the somber tranquility of the night was replaced by the fast-paced hustle of a big city emergency room. You wouldn't even know it was nighttime in this place. The bright fluorescent lights shone down on the busy hallway, leading to a feeling that was indistinguishable from daytime. The next several hours were fairly normal by my standards. The job in general is incredibly hectic, and the night was no different. Basically what I'm saying was that it was a typical crazy night. However, things were taken to another level when a new patient entered the emergency room. He burst through the front entrance covered in blood. Holding his abdomen, he trudged into the waiting room with a look of agony on his face. He looked to be about 40 years old, with long hair. He had a short beard and wore blue jeans. One of the other nurses and I approached him and helped him into the operating room. We cut his shirt off in order to find the source of the blood. His flannel shirt was heavy, having been soaked in blood. I think it was supposed to be yellow with a plaid pattern, but it was impossible to tell. All I could see was red. Looking at his bare chest, it was easy to see the wound. It was a clear knife wound on his stomach on the right side of his body. I quickly stopped the bleeding. His condition was stabilized. Believe it or not, this kind of thing was actually quite common. The other nurse and I were well within our ability to handle the situation. What happened next is what really terrified me. I was alone with the man. He was conscious but laying still. The stab wound was the only serious injury, but I couldn't help but notice several other injuries on his body. They were not bad enough to require emergency treatment, but there were noticeable scratch marks on his arms and face. They were deep, long marks in rows of 3 or 4. They had surely come from fingernails. My expertise is healthcare. I'm not a detective. I don't have the skills to analyze the meaning of a certain type of wound, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But these scratches looked defensive. I was almost sure of it. This man had done something to someone. My gaze moved slowly from the man's arms to his face. He turned to look at me at the same time, and we locked eyes. We held eye contact for several seconds. My mind was racing. Does he know that I know? I thought. Just then, he tried to reach out and grab my arm. Luckily, my reflexes were faster than his, and I quickly left the room. Fortunately, the police were already there, as is common when there's a stabbing. I told the officer what I had seen. He assured me that they would look into it. The man was treated for several more hours by my coworker, and eventually, the case was turned over to the police. I never found out exactly what happened between this man and whoever else was involved, but my intuition tells me that he was bad news. All I can do is hope that whoever the other person was, they got away in better shape than he did. I had been working at a local gas station for a few years at the time. It was the job I had throughout high school, and after graduation, I kept it for a year or two while I was figuring some things out. I started doing the night shift when I no longer needed to get up for school. The pay was better, and I also preferred it for some other reasons. The store never got really busy at night. The pumps were automated, and almost everyone paid at the pump instead of coming in, so it was pretty easy. That, and I was a bit of a night owl anyway. Some would say that I was a video game addict, and they would be right. I was pretty much nocturnal anyway, so the choice to do the night shift was pretty easy. The gas station was on the corner of a quieter street. There were 4 pumps out at the front and a pair of dumpsters at the side. I would take the garbage out every morning at the end of my shift, and the garbage truck would come and empty them right after, as I was leaving for the day at 5 a.m. It was close to 4 a.m. and quiet so far. I don't think I saw more than 3 or 4 customers in the 6 hours that I'd been on duty. I stood behind the counter staring at my phone. I used this time to do some reading and browse social media. The empty store was silent apart from a dull hum from the fluorescent lights that hung overhead. I looked up from the screen of my iPhone when a car pulled into the parking lot. It was an older Pontiac with some noticeable dents and a green paint job with several rust spots. One strange thing was that the headlights were out. It was very dark, and driving around without headlights was downright dangerous at this time. It didn't go to one of the pumps, and I couldn't see where it parked. Thinking it was just somebody turning around, I went back to my phone. Not more than a few minutes later, I heard a loud crash from the side of the building where the dumpsters are. It sounded like someone had opened the lid and slammed it against the side of the building. Whoever was in that car must be throwing something out, I thought. People do that from time to time. It's not allowed, so I usually go out there and tell them that they can't use the dumpsters. I walked out from behind the counter and out the front door. As I made my way closer, a chill ran down my spine. Something felt wrong. Although I wasn't sure what it was, I decided to proceed with caution. I nervously peeked around the corner and saw the car parked in front of the garbage area. A dark figure stood next to the car, but I couldn't make out anything about him. It was too dark. I stood there for several seconds watching, but I couldn't tell what he was doing, although I know he must have been throwing something away. There was just something about this guy that gave me the creeps. I can't explain exactly what it was about him, but for some reason, I decided not to make myself known. I quietly crept back into the store and went back to my post behind the counter. A feeling of relief struck me when I saw the car drive out past the pumps. There was not another customer for the rest of my shift, which was only about another hour. Like I said, I take the garbage out every morning before I finish, so I gathered the few scraps of trash that were in each of the garbage bins throughout the store and packed them into a single large black garbage bag. I flipped the light switch on the other side of the building where the dumpsters were. While I was walking to the dumpster, I remembered the creepy guy from an hour before. Although it didn't occur to me to check what he had thrown out, I realized that I was about to find out. The bright bulbs shone down on the green bins like spotlights, as if they were an exhibit at some kind of a strange modern art gallery. I had to squint my eyes as I approached. When I reached the closest bin, I swung open the large lid and it crashed on the side of the building, causing that familiar noise. Before throwing the bag in, I leaned over and looked inside. What I saw left me so shocked that I dropped the garbage bag on the ground. There was a pile of black garbage bags, and at least one of them was dripping with a red liquid. I had seen enough. I ran into the store and locked the door, then hid behind the counter. I frantically called 911 and told the operator everything, my hand shaking so much that I could hardly hold the phone. The police arrived quickly after, and sure enough, there was a body in the dumpster. I did my best to give them a description of the guy, but like I said, it was so dark without the lights on that I couldn't really tell what he looked like. I was, however, able to give them a description of the car, and based on that, they were able to track the guy down and arrest him. As of this time, he's awaiting trial for murder, and I'm expecting to testify as a witness. I've seen some strange things while working the night shift, but this is by far the scariest. Although terrifying, I continued to do the night shift for several more months. I've never experienced anything like this since, and I hope I never do again. My father used to work as a corrections officer at the state prison where we lived. Although he used to love the job, he left shortly after this incident. Considering what happened, I don't think anyone will blame him. He was working the night shift at the time. It was a pretty laid-back job for the most part. The inmates were all locked up in their cells during his shift. He used to tell me about some of the crazy things that happened during the day. Fights, riots, and everything you can imagine. The night shift, however, was really quite peaceful and relaxing. He used to say that once he got used to the sleep schedule, it was really the better option. My father would usually patrol the prison a few times per shift. Sometimes he would drive around in one of those guard trucks or keep watch in one of the towers. However, on this night, his boss told him to do a sweep of the prison chapel. There wasn't much to it, he told me. You just had to walk around and make sure that nobody was there who shouldn't be. He walked through the yard to the chapel. The large empty space gave off an eerie vibe. Bright floodlights on the prison wall cast a long shadow of my father's body as he trudged past the empty basketball courts. He came up to the front door of the chapel, and when he did, a wave of nervousness came over him. At the time, he didn't know why, so he pushed the large oak door open and stepped inside. He flicked on the light switch and started checking some of the small rooms at the front of the building. After a few minutes, a man walked out of the office at the back of the chapel. He seemed to be another guard. He was wearing the same uniform as my father. However, my dad didn't know this guy. That wasn't that unusual, since sometimes the guards from the day shift would take a night shift for extra money or to cover for someone. Even still, he was confused because his boss asked him to check the chapel. Why would he do that if someone was already there? My father asked the man, "Are you here to do a sweep of the chapel?" "Yes, I'll take it from here," the man replied. My dad stood there confused for several seconds, then said, "Oh, okay, I'll let the boss know." He left the chapel and walked back to his boss's office in the main building. His boss looked up from his desk and said, "How did you get done so fast? You couldn't have possibly checked the whole place in such a short amount of time." "Another guard was there. He said he'd check it out," my dad replied. "Okay, as long as someone checked it," the boss said. My dad was confused at this point. He figured the other guard must have been sent there by someone. If his boss didn't know, then who was that guy? 3 days later, my father was walking down the halls of the prison and stopped to look at the display case. There were various awards and old photos of other guards from times in the past. As he was browsing through the photos, he saw something that made his heart sink. One of the pictures was a memorial to a guard who had been killed in a riot about 20 years ago. The picture was of the guard that my father saw in the chapel that night. He had never been a believer in the paranormal before, but this experience caused him to change his mind. He didn't bother to tell any of his coworkers out of fear that he'd be ridiculed, and not long after, he left the job and made a career change. Although this was a terrifying incident for him, it is one of his favorite stories to tell. I've heard it more than a few times from him, and although I wasn't sure at first, I actually do believe it too.